I want you to close your eyes for a moment, take a deep breath, and try to recall the very specific scent of Greek coffee bubbling slowly in a copper bricky, mixed with the dry, earthy smell of a dusty summer road. Can you hear the rhythmic, metallic ticking of a wall clock cutting through the silence of a hot afternoon? Or the distant, musical cry of a street vendor calling out to the balconies? Welcome back to the Greece of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Today, we are taking a deeply emotional journey to rediscover 20 incredible, everyday habits and rituals that defined our youth. These were the simple, sometimes difficult, but deeply beautiful practices that shaped who we are today. And as we walk down this memory lane, pay close attention, because by the end of this journey, we will remember the most touching, sacred rule of hospitality that defined our homes, a rule that has all but vanished from the modern world. Before we begin, we must remember how differently time flowed back then. In the mid-20th century, life in Greece moved at a deliberate, human pace. We did not have the constant, overwhelming rush of modern technology in our pockets. We had to wait for a handwritten letter to arrive. We had to wait for the Sunday roast to bake. And we had to wait patiently on the corner for a friend to show up. Some people today might look back at those decades and think we were poor because we lacked air conditioning, endless entertainment, or fancy cars. But they are entirely wrong. What we lacked in material wealth, we made up for with an overwhelming abundance of community. We lived our lives with our doors wide open. We looked deeply into each other's eyes when we spoke. We shared our meager plates of food with unannounced guests, and we felt a profound sense of belonging to our neighborhood. We were wealthy in spirit, rich in patience, and surrounded by a web of human connection that is incredibly hard to find today. And now, let us remember the magical Sunday mornings of the 1960s, where the entire neighborhood woke up to a shared ritual. Long before every house had a powerful modern oven, the local bakery, or fornos, was the culinary heart of the community. Picture the large, round, galvanized tin pans, heavy with a leg of lamb nestled among wedge-cut potatoes, all glistening with olive oil, lemon juice, and fragrant mountain oregano. Mothers would carefully balance these heavy pans and walk down the cobbled streets, exchanging morning greetings with neighbors. The bakery was a symphony of smells. The baker would slide dozens of these family meals into his massive wood-fired oven. While families attended the Sunday church service, their lunches were slowly roasting to perfection, the flavors melting together in the intense heat. When the liturgy ended, the streets were filled once again with people carrying their hot, bubbling pans back home. The air was thick with the savory scent of roasted meat and lemon. It was a communal experience, a time when even the preparation of a meal connected you deeply with your neighbors, and Sunday lunch felt like a true, hard-earned celebration. Let us turn our minds to the suffocating heat of a Mediterranean summer night in the 1970s and the beautiful tradition of sleeping on the terrazza, or the flat roof of the house. Air conditioning was an unimaginable luxury, and the inside of the house felt like a furnace after absorbing the relentless sun all day. As dusk fell, families would carry their mattresses, lightweight cotton sheets, and pillows up the narrow stairs to the roof or the spacious balcony. You would lie down on the cool cotton, feeling the gentle night breeze finally sweeping off the Aegean Sea. The sky above was an endless canopy of brilliant stars, untouched by the bright lights of modern cities. You could hear the muffled conversations of neighbors on their own roofs, the distant barking of a dog, and the rhythmic song of the crickets. Siblings would whisper secrets in the dark, pointing at shooting stars until their eyelids grew heavy. Waking up the next morning was just as magical, roused by the cool, damp morning dew on your skin and the golden light of the early sun. It was a time when we slept under the heavens, completely vulnerable, but feeling entirely safe in the embrace of our community. Moving on through the memories of our youth, we find the sacred and unbreakable rule of the afternoon siesta, known as messimeriani isichia. In the 1960s and 70s, from the hours of 3 to 5 in the afternoon, the entire country simply stopped breathing. The wooden shutters were pulled tight against the blazing afternoon sun, plunging the rooms into a cool, amber dimness. The only sound permitted inside the house was the rhythmic, hypnotic ticking of the wall clock, and perhaps the soft, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping grandfather. Outside, the streets were completely deserted, transformed into silent, sun-baked ghost towns. For children, this was a time of beautiful agony. You were forced to lie in bed in the semi-darkness, eyes wide open, imagining adventures and desperately waiting for the hours to pass. If you dared to sneak out to play, you had to move like a shadow, terrified of the loud crack of a neighbour's window opening to scold you for breaking the peace. This forced pause in the day taught us patience. It gave the working people a moment to restore their weary bodies. And it taught us children a profound respect for the rest and peace of others. And now let us remember the yellow wooden box on the corner of the street, the iconic Greek periptero or kiosk, which served as the beating heart of neighbourhood communication. In an era when having a private telephone in your own home was a rare privilege that required years of waiting, the kiosk was our lifeline to the outside world. The kiosk owner was not just a vendor of newspapers and cigarettes. He was the keeper of secrets, the messenger of good and bad news. Can you remember standing in line on a dusty sidewalk, clutching a few heavy metallic drachma coins in your sweaty palm? When it was your turn, you would pick up the heavy black receiver of the rotary phone sitting proudly on the counter. The loud, metallic clanking of the coin dropping into the slot was the sound of connection. Neighbours would wait nearby, respectfully pretending not to listen to your conversation, yet somehow knowing everything that was going on. If a call came in for someone on the street, the kiosk owner would send a little boy running down the block to fetch them. It made our lives deeply intertwined. We did not have instant messaging, but we had a community that shared in every joy and every sorrow. Let us take a moment to recall the scent of wet earth on a scorching afternoon, a smell that instantly brings back the 1960s. Before the streets were entirely paved with asphalt and concrete, many courtyards and neighbourhood roads were made of packed dirt. By late afternoon, the dry Greek heat would turn the ground into a fine, suffocating dust that coated everything. The daily ritual of watering the yard was an absolute necessity, but it was also a moment of profound relief. Grandmothers and mothers would emerge from their homes holding long green rubber hoses, or sometimes just large, dented tin buckets filled with water. With a sweeping, rhythmic motion of their arms, they would scatter the water across the baking earth. The immediate hiss of the water hitting the hot ground released the most intoxicating, earthy perfume. They would then take a stiff broom made of dry twigs and sweep the dampened yard clean. The temperature of the entire neighbourhood would suddenly drop, offering a refreshing breath of cool air just before the evening set in. This simple chore was a quiet meditation, a daily cleansing that washed away the heavy heat of the day and prepared the home to welcome the evening. Do you remember the chaotic, joyous days of early summer, when the entire street transformed into a massive outdoor laundry? The seasonal washing of the heavy winter carpets, especially the thick, fluffy woolen flocati rugs, was a monumental task that no woman could tackle alone. It was a communal event that brought all the neighbourhood women out onto the pavement. They would unroll the massive, heavy carpets directly onto the street or the sloping concrete driveways. Armed with buckets of water, thick scrubbing brushes, and blocks of green olive oil soap, they would get to work. The air filled with the sharp, clean scent of the green soap and the sounds of vigorous scrubbing, splashing water, and endless gossip. For us children, this was an absolute playground. We would run barefoot through the streams of soapy, grey water flowing down the gutters, our laughter echoing against the houses. The women would roll up the soaking wet, incredibly heavy rugs and hoist them over the balcony railings to dry in the blazing sun for days. Looking down the street, you would see a vibrant exhibition of dripping textiles hanging from every house. It was hard, back-breaking labour, yet the shared effort turned it into a festival. And what could be more nostalgic than the distant, magical sound of a small brass bell ringing through the summer haze? It was the Pagatatzis, the wandering ice cream man, making his daily route through the neighborhood. Long before every house had a freezer stuffed with treats, ice cream was a rare and treasured luxury. Hearing that bell was like hearing the voice of an angel. We would beg our mothers for a coin, our voices filled with desperation, and then sprint down the dusty street to catch him before he turned the corner. He usually pushed a heavy, white wooden cart with large bicycle wheels, or sometimes rode a customized tricycle. When he finally stopped, he would lift the heavy metal lid of his insulated box, releasing a thick, mysterious cloud of freezing white mist into the hot air. Inside were simple treasures. There were no extravagant flavors with chocolate chips or caramel swirls. There was only pure, rich kaimaki, made from sheep's milk and mastic, or simple vanilla scooped into a small wafer cone. That first lick, cold and sweet against the sweltering heat of August, was a moment of pure bliss. We ate it slowly, trying to make the magic last as long as possible. Let us walk in our memories to the local square, drawn by the sharp, rhythmic clacking of wooden pieces against a hollow board. This was the sound of the traditional Greek kathaneo, the absolute center of social life for the men of the community in the 1970s and 80s. It was a humble room, usually filled with small wooden chairs featuring woven rush seats and square tables with marble tops. The air was always thick with a haze of cigarette smoke and the incredibly loud, passionate voices of men debating politics, football, or the daily news. Here, time seemed to stand still. Men would sit for hours over a single, tiny, thick porcelain cup of strong Greek coffee, savoring the rich foam on top and leaving the dark grounds at the bottom. The clicking of the worry beads created a constant, restless soundtrack, but the true soul of the kathaneo was the game of tavli, or backgammon. The speed and aggression with which the dice were rolled and the checkers were slammed onto the wooden board spoke volumes about the players' emotions. It was a sanctuary of camaraderie, a place where men shared their burdens, argued fiercely, and always forgave each other before leaving for dinner. Now let us remember the quiet, delicate art of preparing the troika, the dowry, a tradition that consumed the evenings of almost every mother and daughter in the 1960s. In those days, a young woman's worth was often intertwined with the contents of a heavy wooden chest that sat proudly in the corner of the bedroom. Preparing this chest was a labor of love that began when a girl was just a child. I want you to recall the soft evening light filtering through the window as mothers, grandmothers, and daughters sat in a tight circle, their heads bowed over wooden embroidery hoops. The rhythmic pulling of thick cotton threads through crisp white fabric was a meditation. They created intricate lace edgings, cross-stitched colourful floral patterns onto pillowcases, and crocheted large, elaborate tablecloths. Each stitch was a wish for a happy marriage, a prayer woven directly into the fabric of the girl's future home. Your fingers might still remember the rough texture of the unwashed cotton and the slight prick of the needle. This was not just about making beautiful linens, it was an intergenerational bonding ritual. The troika represented patience, devotion, and the immense love a family poured into a young woman. Can you still smell the intoxicating fragrance of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the salty scent of roasted pumpkin seeds? This is the unforgettable aroma of the Thorino Cinema, the outdoor summer movie theatre, which was the absolute highlight of a Greek summer evening. In the 1970s, when televisions were still a novelty, the entire neighborhood would gather under the open sky to watch a film. You would walk across the crunching white gravel to find your seat in the wobbly canvas director's chairs. The screen was a large white wall wedged between two apartment buildings, framed by climbing ivy and honeysuckle. When the lights went down, the magical beam of the projector sliced through the warm night air, illuminating the dust particles. We watched dramatic Greek melodramas that made the women weep into their handkerchiefs, or hilarious comedies that made the men roar with laughter. The sound of the movie was constantly interrupted by the crunching of sunflower seeds and the distant hum of mopeds passing on the street outside. Looking up, you could see the glowing moon and the stars right above the flickering screen. It was an immersive, romantic experience, a perfect marriage of art and the warm Greek night. Let us close our eyes and listen to the vanishing soundtrack of our neighborhoods, the musical, booming voices of the wandering street tradesmen. Decades ago, you did not always need to go to the market because the market came directly to your doorstep. Every morning was punctuated by a different call echoing up to the balconies. There was the greengrocer, slowly driving his three-wheeled truck, piled high with incredibly fragrant sun-ripened tomatoes and massive green watermelons, shouting his prices through a crackling megaphone. There was the palazzis, the rag and bone man, singing out for old clothes, broken chairs, and scrap metal, willing to trade a plastic basin for your unwanted goods. And who could forget the sharp, terrifying screech of the knife sharpener's grinding wheel? He would pedal his stationary bicycle to spin the heavy stone, sending a cascade of brilliant orange sparks into the air as he sharpened the household knives and scissors. Women would lower baskets tied to long ropes from their high balconies, filled with coins to pay for fresh eggs or vegetables. These men were part of the daily rhythm of life. Their voices were the clocks by which we measured our mornings, a vibrant, chaotic symphony of human connection. As summer reached its fiery peak in late August, the balconies and courtyards were transformed into open-air food preservation factories. This brings us to the deeply nostalgic ritual of making homemade tricanas and sun-dried tomatoes. Before the era of giant supermarkets and artificial preservatives, families had to capture the bounty of the summer to survive the winter. Picture the bright red tomatoes, sliced in half and heavily salted, laid out on massive wooden boards under the unforgiving sun. They would sit there for days, slowly shriveling, concentrating their intense, sweet flavor, guarded carefully against insects with thin layers of cheesecloth. Beside them, clean white cotton sheets were spread across the flat roofs, covered in tiny, crumbled pieces of tricanas, a mixture of cracked wheat and fermented milk. The whole family would sit together in the evening, rubbing the dried dough through large metal sieves until their palms were raw and red. The smell was incredibly distinct, a sour, milky, earthy aroma that filled the entire house. Storing these dried goods in large glass jars or cloth sacks felt like locking away a piece of the summer sun. When winter came, a steaming bowl of soup tasted exactly like August. And now, let us remember the absolute freedom of childhood in the 1960s and 70s, a time when the street outside your house was your entire universe. There were very few cars, and the asphalt or dirt roads belonged entirely to the children. From the moment school finished until the deep dusk, the neighborhoods echoed with the sounds of running footsteps, bouncing rubber balls, and fierce arguments over the rules of a game. We played hide and seek in unfinished construction sites, scraped our knees on rough sidewalks, playing marbles, and drew elaborate hopscotch grids with stolen pieces of white chalk. There were no organized playdates or scheduled activities. You simply walked out your front door and shouted for your friends. We were feral and free, inventing worlds out of sticks and abandoned tires. The ultimate boundary, the absolute curfew that no child dared to ignore, was the sudden, flickering yellow glow of the street lamps turning on. That was the universal signal. Soon after, the voices of mothers would ring out from the balconies, calling our names through the darkening air. We returned home exhausted, covered in dust, but our hearts were incredibly full of joy from a day of unscripted, unsupervised adventure. Let us turn our memories to the meticulous, intimate ritual of visiting the neighborhood seamstress, the modistra. In an era when buying ready-made clothing from a store was a rare and expensive event, most of our garments were born in the small, cluttered front rooms of talented local women. A visit began with a trip to the fabric store, unrolling heavy bolts of wool or crisp cotton, running the textiles through our fingers. Then came the visit to the modistra, Her room always smelled of hot ironed fabric, chalk, and machine oil. In the center of the room stood the heavy, black, cast-iron sewing machine, operated by the rhythmic pressing of a foot pedal. We would stand perfectly still on a small wooden stool, holding our breath, while she moved around us with a tape measure draped over her neck and her mouth full of sharp metal pins. The feeling of the cold pins grazing your skin as she expertly tucked and folded the fabric is impossible to forget. She would consult worn-out fashion magazines from Paris or Italy, trying to recreate the glamour for the women of the neighborhood. The clothes she made were not disposable. They were built to last, to be let out, taken in, and eventually passed down with immense pride. As the intense heat of the day finally surrendered to the evening breeze, a beautiful social phenomenon took place on every street corner. This was the gathering on the bouzouki, the low stone walls or steps right outside the front doors of the houses. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the women of the neighborhood would finish their indoor chores and move outside. They brought small, low wooden chairs with them, or simply sat directly on the whitewashed stone steps, which were finally cool to the touch. This was not a time for idleness. Their hands were always busy. They would sit with large metal bowls in their laps, peeling huge mounds of potatoes, snapping the ends off fresh green beans, or shelling peas for the next day's lunch. But the real purpose of this gathering was the conversation. It was the daily neighborhood news exchange. They whispered about courtships, complained about their husbands, shared recipes, and analyzed the behavior of every person who walked down the street. It was an invisible, powerful web of community support. If a woman did not show up on her steps for a day or two, someone would knock on her door to check on her. The bouzouki was our internet, woven together with empathy and endless talking. Let us travel back to the living rooms of our childhood, where the focal point was not a flat black screen, but a massive, polished wooden box with glowing glass tubes inside. In the 1960s, the radio was the magical oracle that brought the vast world into our humble homes. Listening to it was a dedicated family activity, not merely background noise. In the evenings, families would gather closely around the device, staring at the illuminated dial as if the pictures were hiding just behind the fabric speaker grill. We listened with bated breath to serialized theatrical dramas, our imaginations working frantically to paint the faces of the characters based solely on the rich timbre of their voices. On Sunday afternoons, the atmosphere changed completely. The radio broadcasted the football matches, and men would lean in so close their ears almost touched the wood, agonizing over the crackling, static-filled commentary. When the signal faded, someone would urgently fiddle with the large plastic knobs or adjust the delicate wire antenna, desperately trying to catch the frequency through the interference. The radio required our full attention and our imagination. It demanded that we sit together in silence, sharing the emotion. Do you remember the sharp, rhythmic slapping sound echoing across the rocky shores of the Greek coastline in the early mornings? This is the visceral, completely unforgettable ritual of beating the octopus. For those who lived near the sea, catching an octopus was a triumph, but preparing it required brutal, patient labor. Fresh out of the water, the creature's muscles are incredibly tough and rubbery. Before it could ever reach the charcoal grill, it had to be tenderized by hand. Fathers and local fishermen would stand on the jagged rocks, gripping the heavy, wet octopus by the head, and violently hurl its tentacles against the flat stones. Smack, smack, smack. 40, 50, sometimes 100 times. They would then rub it vigorously in circular motions against the rough rocks until the thick slime dissolved and the tentacles curled perfectly. Finally, they would string the octopuses up on a makeshift clothesline, hanging them in the blazing sun and salty sea breeze to dry for a day, looking completely alien against the blue sky. It was a primitive, exhausting process, but it was done with a deep respect for the sea's offerings. When that octopus was eventually grilled over hot coals, you tasted the immense effort of that morning. And now let us plunge into the beautiful, overwhelming chaos of the weekly Laiki Agora, the open-air farmers market. Once a week, a quiet neighborhood street would completely transform into a vibrant, deafening bazaar of colors, smells, and screaming vendors. Waking up early on market day was essential to get the freshest produce. The farmers would stand behind long wooden tables, groaning under the weight of dirt-covered carrots, massive bunches of wild greens called horta, and mountains of shiny black olives. The noise was absolutely incredible. Every vendor had his own unique musical chant, screaming at the top of his lungs to convince you that his peaches were sweeter than honey. Women dragged small, two-wheeled metal shopping carts, carefully inspecting every single tomato, refusing to accept anything less than perfection. There was bargaining, loud arguing, and sudden booming laughter. The smells shifted with every step you took, from the sharp tang of fresh lemons to the earthy aroma of raw potatoes and the bloody scent of the fishmonger's stall on ice. Walking home, your hands would ache from the heavy plastic bags cutting into your fingers, but unpacking those treasures on the kitchen table felt like bringing the absolute best of the Greek earth into your home. Let us take a moment to appreciate a sound that is entirely synonymous with the Greek male experience of the 20th century. The slow, rhythmic, hypnotic clicking of the komboloi, the worry beads. In the 1960s and 70s, almost every man carried a string of beads in his pocket. It was not a religious item, it was a deeply personal tool for meditation, relaxation, and passing the slow hours. Picture an older gentleman walking slowly down the street, his hands clasped behind his back, his fingers expertly flipping a string of heavy, amber, glass, or olive wood beads. The beads would slide down the string and strike each other with a sharp, satisfying clack. This sound filled the cafenio, the bus stops, and the living rooms. Men played with them when they were anxious, when they were trying to quit smoking, or simply when they were deep in thought. The constant friction of calloused thumbs against the beads would smooth them over the years, transferring the man's nervous energy directly into the polished stones. The komboloi was an extension of the hands, a physical manifestation of patience. The clicking was a comforting, steady heartbeat of Greek society, a sound that immediately tells you that you are safely home. Finally, let us remember the sweetest and most profound ritual of Greek hospitality, the serving of the spoon sweet, known as gliko tou koutaliou. In those days, people did not call before they visited. A knock on the door meant an unexpected guest had arrived, but a Greek home was never caught unprepared. The moment a guest sat on the sofa, the mother of the house would immediately go to the kitchen. She would return carrying a beautiful silver-plated tray with small, ornate glass plates. On each plate rested a single, perfect spoonful of preserved fruit. It could be sour cherry, bright green unripe walnut, or coiled peels of bitter orange, all suspended in a thick, brilliant syrup. Alongside the sweet, there was always a tall glass of freezing cold water and a cup of freshly brewed Greek coffee. The guest was expected to eat the intensely sweet fruit in 1 or 2 bites, followed by a long, refreshing sip of the cold water. It was an elegant, deeply respectful gesture. It meant, "You are welcome here, and I want your life to be sweet." This simple offering required hours of tedious labor in the kitchen beforehand, boiling and skimming syrups, but it was given effortlessly. It was the ultimate symbol of the open hearts and open doors of our youth. Looking back at these 20 beautiful habits, a bittersweet realization washes over us. We realize that we do not simply miss the taste of the vanilla ice cream or the heavy weight of the woolen carpets. We do not miss the agonizing heat or the hard physical labor. What we truly miss is the way time felt. We miss the safety of the neighborhood, the open doors of our houses, and the profound, unbreakable connections we shared with the people around us. Most of all, we miss our youth, a time when the world seemed both much smaller and infinitely richer in spirit. If this journey back to our beloved Greece brought a tear to your eye, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we can continue to preserve these precious memories together. Now, I want to ask you a question. Which of these beautiful, vanished habits do you miss the most? And what precious memory from your own childhood did I leave out? Please share your personal stories in the comments below. Let us keep the warmth of those golden years alive in our hearts together.